So whether you voted for this government or not, we are in your service.
Tonight, Prime Minister Mark Carney unveiled his first cabinet, which includes 3 Indigenous MPs.
You can feel that love, the support, the unity, the solidarity today.
A gathering in Winnipeg on Tuesday to draw attention to missing and murdered Indigenous men and boys.
We're in an era and a time that we just need to go in our own backyard, and we're going to see how great and beautiful of a country we have.
And with summer just around the corner, more people are choosing to vacation closer to home. We look at Indigenous-owned businesses in Manitoba. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. We begin in Ottawa tonight, where Mark Carney unveiled his first cabinet as elected Prime Minister on Tuesday. It is a 2-tiered cabinet of 28 ministers and 10 secretaries of state. 2 Indigenous MPs have been appointed to cabinet and another as the Secretary of State. All 3 are newly elected. All were sworn in by Governor General Mary Simon at Rideau Hall. APTN's Fraser Needham has the story.
The new cabinet contains a number of new faces. This includes Northern Quebec MP Mandy Galmasti, who takes over at Indigenous Services Canada. Galmasti is the former head of the Grand Council of the Crees and the first Indigenous person to oversee ISC. Northern Manitoba MP Rebecca Chartrand has been appointed to Northern Affairs. Chartrand identifies as Anishinaabe, Innu, Dakota, and Métis. Northern Saskatchewan MP Buckley Boulanger, who is Métis, is the Secretary of State for Rural Development. In a press conference at Rideau Hall after announcing the new cabinet, Carney said his team will govern for all, regardless of who Canadians cast a ballot for in the recent election.
So whether you voted for this government or not, we are in your service, in the service of building a stronger, more united Canada. We will build and we will govern for all Canadians. Build big, build bold, build now.
In another press conference on Parliament Hill, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre said the new Prime Minister may be trying to project an image of change, but his cabinet contains many faces who served with former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, including new Justice Minister Sean Fraser.
Sean Fraser was the immigration minister who caused the immigration crisis, the housing minister who gave us the housing crisis, and now he's the minister responsible for addressing the Liberal crime crisis. It seems like he is the master at failing upward.
Northwest Territories MP Rebecca Alty is the new Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations. Her predecessor, Gary Anasandagri, moves from that portfolio to public safety, and Patty Haidu goes from ISC to Jobs and Families. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
For more on Prime Minister Mark Carney's cabinet, we're joined by Cody Grout, Mohawk Assistant Professor in the Department of History and the Indigenous Studies at Western University in London, Ontario. Cody, thanks so much for joining us. A lot going on with this cabinet. What were your initial thoughts?
I think Carney did a really good job finding that balance between having established cabinet ministers from the Justin Trudeau era and introducing a lot of new people. I think we're surprised to see just how many brand new MPs are included in his cabinet. I think there was close to over 20 members of parliament who are now in cabinet who have never even served as members of parliament before. So definitely a change up there.
Now, Mandy Galmasti becomes the first Indigenous person to head up Indigenous Services Canada. What do you think of that historic pick?
I think I'm a bit on the fence on it, and only because I'm going to build off the words of Jody Wilson-Raybould, who served quite iconically in the Justice portfolio. It's really hard to be an Indigenous person serving in a ministerial capacity overseeing the very colonial Indian Act. And I think that's a delicate balance that Mandy Galmasti is going to have to balance. She definitely has that experience being a former Grand Chief of the Grand Council of the Cree. She's going to bring in that lived experience of being a elected official in a First Nation who navigates that system, but at the same time, she is now a First Nations woman in charge of a very colonial infrastructure. So finding that balance might be difficult.
And during maybe some tougher times than previous governments, in Manitoba there were calls for former Indigenous Services Minister Patty Hajdu to be removed from her post over Jordan's principle. What do you see as Minister Galmasty's big challenges ahead?
I think it's really going to be striking that balance between being a First Nations woman who has held elected office in a First Nation, but working under the priorities of this elected Liberal government, this Canadian government, because I think there's going to be almost that expectation that having an Indigenous person in this role is going to alleviate some of the problems with Jordan's principle, with missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls with unmarked graves. There's going to be this perception, perhaps automatically, that this is a solution to the problem, but the structural issues are still there. They're not going to change at all. So I think that balance is what we're going to have to really look at.
Right. 3 Indigenous members of Parliament have become ministers, with Rebecca Chartrand also becoming Minister of Northern and Arctic Affairs, Buckley Belanger becoming Secretary of State for Rural Development. And I'll add to that the former Mayor of Yellowknife, Rebecca Alty, is the new Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations. What do you think these picks mean for Indigenous peoples in the days ahead?
I'm glad to see that we have experienced people in these roles. I look at Buckley Belanger, for example. He served as a member of the Legislative Assembly for close to a decade. He has that deep legislative experience, even if he's a new member of Parliament. I think that we can also see, though, he was appointed for that regional representation. He's the only Liberal member of Parliament from Saskatchewan. It was likely he was going to have a seat at the table, and he is one of those secretaries of state, so one of those more secondary cabinet positions. I think Rebecca Chartrand is going to have a lot on her plate when we look at risks to Arctic sovereignty with the United States and with Russia. I think that Northern Affairs portfolio might be quite heavy, and we'll see how that works. And her relationships with Inuit, being an Anishinaabe woman and kind of having that perspective as well. And then again, Rebecca Alty, former Mayor of Yellowknife, I think, again, someone of deep experience who's coming to the table for that portfolio. And of course, Prime Minister Mark Carney is also from Northwest Territories himself, so we'll see how that interplays in this as well.
Do you have any thoughts on what these picks mean for what a Mark Carney government's going to look like here?
I think it's probably one of the strongest benches for Indigenous peoples who are cabinet ministers. I think when we look at some of those other portfolios, like Minister of Justice, that's always one that interplays quite significantly with the rights of Indigenous peoples, especially in sort of this post-UNDRIP era. Sean Fraser, who's sort of a rising star in the Liberal government, this is a huge jump for him, formerly Minister of Housing. He'll have a lot of work on his plates, and he's sort of given a lot of tasks that the Carney government might pass to him in the justice portfolio. We'll see how that plays out. We're going to see natural resources perhaps being developed at a pace under Carney that was faster than it was under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So again, we'll have to see how those new cabinet ministers engage in those conversations, especially with the rhetoric of Alberta sovereignty. That's going to be quite active. So seeing how a Carney cabinet negotiates that in relation to the rights of Indigenous peoples is going to be an interesting conversation.
Well, it's been an interesting day and interesting days ahead. Cody, appreciate you taking some time for us.
Thank you for having me.
To Winnipeg now, where members of the Indigenous community gathered to draw attention to missing and murdered Indigenous men and boys earlier today. They're calling on Indigenous leaders and government alike to get a nationally recognized day dedicated to men and boys. Here's APTN's TR Wheatley with more.
With the Warriors Call and song echoing, over 100 people walked through downtown Winnipeg, carrying signs with pictures of men and boys gone missing or murdered.
The support, you can feel that love, the support, the unity, the solidarity today.
Corrine Chief organized the event meant to recognize how men and boys are also taken by violence at alarming rates. In 2021, she lost her brother, Felix Bernard Chief.
I call him Bernard, but his life was taken at the age of 28 years old here in Winnipeg on Burroughs and Aikens by our own people, unfortunately.
According to Statistics Canada, Indigenous men and boys are 7 times more likely to be murdered than any other race, and at a rate 3 times higher than Indigenous women and girls. Many at the hands of other Indigenous men, like Corrine's brother was. She says more needs to be done to deal with the intergenerational trauma Indigenous families are facing.
The band-aiding, the child welfare system, poverty, because why would our men and our boys viciously do this to somebody else? And I seen that, going through this process with my brother for the past 4 years, is that something happened to these individuals, why they acted out so viciously. And I know I want to come to, forgiveness and to understand them too and to talk with them.
Something this family also agrees with. In 2024, they lost 2 men to violence. 34-year-old Preston Menard was killed in a double homicide in Dauphin, Manitoba last June. The month before, on May 14, 23-year-old Leo Caribou Jr. was murdered in Winnipeg. Rachel Woolen is Leo's aunt.
I watched my sisters, I watched my nieces and nephews still going through this, and many, many other families every day.
So far in 2025 in Winnipeg, there have been 13 homicides. Of the 13, 8 are First Nations men.
The most homicides in Manitoba, 8 men are from First Nations. So it really needs to be talked about. A lot of work has to be done. I mean, I've heard announcements about, so much funds for our women. But in order to be a whole family and be united, we need to also put some money into our men.
A conversation that Chief and many others here want to start.
My brother was tragically taken, but is turning things around to outlet in a good, healthy way and to bring this awareness and to call out our leadership.
With a goal to get government on board to push to make May 13 a nationally recognized day for Indigenous men and boys. T.R. Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
To the Yukon now, where RCMP are appealing to the public for information in a historical investigation surrounding the death of a Casca woman. 26-year-old Tutsi Jimmy Charlie was last seen on March 20th, 1967. She was 5'5" tall and weighed 120 pounds. Jimmy Charlie was wearing a green sweater, black pants, and rubber boots. Her body was found 2 months later on May 17th at the Whitehorse landfill. At the time, it was located off of Range Road overlooking McIntyre Creek. A red and black plaid jacket and pale purple sweater were located near where she was found. The RCMP apologized to Jimmy Charlie's family in 2022 for not conducting a thorough investigation into her death. And anyone with information can contact the Yukon RCMP's Historical Case Unit at 1-867-667-5555. A hockey team from the East Coast had the chance to travel to Montreal to meet some of their heroes. That story and more still to come. Welcome back. An under-15 female hockey team from Nain, Labrador recently traveled to Montreal to meet their hockey heroes and watch a professional women's hockey league playoff game between the Montreal Victoire and the Ottawa Charge. Angel Moore has that story.
I think since we walked in, I've had a smile on my face the whole time.
Peyton Vicker is talking about meeting her hockey heroes. They play for the Montreal Victoire of the Professional Women's Hockey League team practice.
I think it's pretty cool that they got this going, because I always used to just watch NHL, so it's just all men playing, but now to be able to see a woman play professionally is pretty cool.
Vicker is a right winger for Team Nain-E-Miut, an under-15 girls hockey team. She and 8 of her teammates, who are between 11 and 15 years old, traveled from their community, Nain, Labrador, to Montreal for a 6-day excursion. The PWHL hopes it inspires the youth to play professional hockey. Tessa Dicker is 11 years old and is a forward on Team Nain-E-Miut.
That it's a big city and and it's a huge rink. There's millions of chairs that I've never seen before.
Nain is the most northern settlement in Labrador, with over 2,000 people, and is over 1,400 kilometers from Montreal. Julie Dicker is the youth chaperone and says the travel was worth it.
Well, their faces were in astonishment, like, holy, that's how they go, holy. When they meet the players, they met a few players last night at the restaurant across from the hotel.
Claire DeGeorge is a forward for the Montreal Victoire. She says she did not have many female role models in hockey.
Mostly just watching boys hockey. I'm from Anchorage, Alaska, so we didn't have very many professional women playing. So being out here and being that role model for these girls is something special.
Saroya Tinker is the manager of community engagement at the PWHL.
If we're not being inclusive, we wouldn't have a fan base. So to be able to have that outreach and reach into the community and make sure we have that community engagement is imperative for us moving forward. And we've been able to build it from the ground up, which is the most amazing part. And that involves finding communities such as Nain and bringing them into the game.
The girls were treated to front row seats at the first round of the playoffs against the Ottawa Charge. Vicker says the trip has inspired her to become a professional hockey player.
You really want to, you can do whatever. Like if you work hard enough and you want something, like just go for it, and like who knows, you might end up here one day.
Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabuktuk, also known as Halifax.
If you're one of those planning a trip closer to home this summer, we've got some ideas for you in Manitoba coming up after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And Candace Silas sent us this stunning photo of the blooming crocuses in Minto Landing, located along Highway 2 in southern Yukon. Thanks, Candace. If you'd like to be featured as our next photo of the day, you can send your photos to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 21 in Halifax, 24 in Fredericton, 9 in Kuujjuaq, showers, and 5 in Nain. 27 in Montreal, sunny skies, and 26 in Chibougamau. 19 in Sault Ste. Marie, showers, and 27 in Ottawa. 18 with rain in Thunder Bay, 29 with showers in Sioux Lookout. 7 in God's Lake, 10 in Norway House. 30 in Winnipeg, 11 with showers in Dauphin. 19 with rain in Regina, 20 in Saskatoon. 21 in Meadow Lake, 15 and sunny in La Ronge. In northern Alberta, 10 in High Level, 12 for Fort Chipewyan. 20 in Edmonton, Medicine Hat, and Lethbridge. 16 with showers in Vancouver, rain, and 20 in Kamloops. 14 with showers in Prince George, 16 in Smithers. Plus 3 in Old Crow, 10 in Whitehorse. 7 in Yellowknife, cloudy and 2 in Norman Wells. Minus 4 with snow in Sax Harbor, flurries, and 9 below in Pawlatuck. Minus 3 in Chesterfield, 4 below in Baker Lake. Minus 9 with snow in Resolute, 0 with snow in Pangerton. It's that time of year now when we look for new adventures and experiences after hibernating in our homes throughout the long winter. As many folks are choosing to stay on this side of the medicine line during the tariff war initiated by U.S. President Donald Trump, Indigenous-owned tourism businesses are waiting to give you an experience like no other. Sav Jonesa has more.
Ashley Smith is getting her Indigenous tourism business ready for the summer. It's an off-grid yet totally glamorous four-season camping destination in Riding Mountain National Park.
We built it to feel like a teepee where you're really low to the ground with lots of windows and lots of cool air, and you hear the sound of nature, but you're safe from the elements as well.
Turtle Village is comprised of 8 year-round micro cabins or turtle shells, along with ice fishing huts for winter, thanks to a crystal clear lake a short walk away.
We did create it with a Murphy bed so that you could lift this up in rainy days, or if you just want to come and hang out.
She says it's going to be a busy year. More and more people are choosing to stay away from the United States amidst President Donald Trump's tariff war on Canada.
We've been going off and discovering the world, but I think we're in an era and a time that we just need to go in our own backyard, and we're going to see how great and beautiful of a country we have.
Over in Winnipeg, we went to the Wyndham Garden Winnipeg Airport Hotel on Long Plain First Nations Urban Reserve to speak with Indigenous Tourism Manitoba CEO Holly Kershane. She says the Indigenous tourism sector is growing rapidly in Manitoba.
We know that travelers, whether they be international travelers or domestic travelers, they're looking for those authentic Indigenous stories and those experiences.
With more than 170 Indigenous tourist experiences to choose from throughout the province, Kershane says supporting them during your staycations also means contributing to reconciliation.
A lot of these businesses and experiences are telling their story about being an Indigenous person, where they come from, the history of, their community and their family. So when you visit these experiences and you hear these stories, you're actually learning about Indigenous people and history.
As for generational connections to the land, Smith says her ancestor was one of the first to create winter lodging in Riding Mountain National Park more than 200 years ago. Now, she's here continuing the legacy with her family of 5.
If you're thinking about doing Indigenous tourism as an Indigenous person, it's actually very suiting to who we are as people, because you can bring your family, you can set your own hours, you can develop it and structure it however you want.
To find more Indigenous tourism businesses to support, check out indigenoustourisammanitoba.ca. Sav Jones, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Thanks for that, Sav. Jamie Blackmore-Sett recently launched a book called Redress: Art, Action, and the Power of Presence. Redress is a collection of writings about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Jamie Blackmore-Sett and T.R. Wheatley talk about the importance of reclaiming space on a new episode of Face to Face tonight. Here's a quick look.
Reclaiming Power and Place, the National Inquiry's final report title was really powerful, and I think around that time there was a lot of talk about reclaiming and looking into kind of land-based initiatives, relearning a lot of our old teachings and stories, just relearning the creative practices and spiritual practices that we may have lost connection with, and so that really reclaiming narrative was part of that time. And and I think that my book also, has elements of that, of just really coming back to what does it look like to reclaim, to come back to ourselves, to remember ourselves and put ourselves back together and allow ourselves to walk forward with that remembrance as at the core of who we are.
And you can catch that entire episode with TR and Jamie in less than 2 minutes from now. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Tuesday. Of course, for news anytime and more on today's cabinet appointments, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy McGuitch, thanks for being with us. Have a great night.